Welcome to the From the Shadows podcast. I am your host, Shane Grove. And before we get started with this episode, I just want to remind everybody that if you've had an experience or a sighting that you would like to share, go to the FromTheShadowsPodcast.com, hit the contact page, send me an email, and I will get back to you. Now, from that website, you can go check out everything else from the Shadows podcast, including our Instagram, our TikTok, our Patreon page, everything. You can even buy merch if you want to. If you really want an Ozark Howler t-shirt, that's the place to get one. So if you want to get a hold of me directly, you can find me on Instagram at Shane Grove Author. Send me a message. Find me on Facebook. Send me a message, and I will get back to you. With that being said, everybody that's longtime loyal listeners of the show know that we love Ohio stories because we're based in North Central Ohio. And so I'm excited about this guest we have coming on because he has an experience that took place in Ohio, which, is cool. I might be able to drive down there and find the place that this happened. And I don't want to experience it myself. Who am I kidding? So with that being said, Scott, welcome to the From the Shadows podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me on, Shane.
Now, so, we were talking before you came on. We got a laundry list of stuff we're going to try to cover. But the main thing I want to hear about is a Dogman experience that you had. And I just want you to jump right in, tell us, within reason, where, when, and what the heck happened.
Okay. Well, this would have been late October 2022. I was driving home from a choir concert with my teenage daughter in the car. Her and I had gone to the concert. I'd taken her to the concert because my wife and I have a 5-year-old boy. They stayed at home because the 5-year-old boy really couldn't sit for 3 hours and listen to singing. So I went with just my daughter. It was probably around 9:30 at night. Most of the cornfields and everything and the brush, everything obviously at that time of year is gone. So you've got a lot of open area. We were heading outside of our little town in southeastern Ohio. We just crossed a pretty good sized creek over a bridge, and they were doing some construction. And they had some orange signs up and things like that, roadwork signs. And as soon as we crossed the creek, we saw a very large dog, wolf-like creature come out of the dry creek bed a little farther down the road, run across the road in just like a blink of an eye. It was so fast. And I remember looking at my daughter, and she was looking at me, and I kind of, said, well, what was that? And she goes, I don't know, big dog. And being a teenage girl, she went right back on her phone, right? She's like, she just said big dog. And I'm like, no, that was something else. I've seen a lot of animals in the wild, coyote, bear. I mean, you name it. I've spent most of my adult life camping, fishing, Boy Scouts, all that stuff. I've been out in the wild a lot and in nature. And this thing right away, I knew it was big. It was approximately 40 to 50 feet in front of the car. We had a newer car, so that it had the pretty bright LED headlights on it. So I got a pretty good look at it. It basically reminded me of, I know we were talking about like childhood movies. It reminded me of American Werewolf in London. That's what I pictured when I saw this thing run across the road. However, it moved at a speed that was very unnatural. And I say that because it covered almost 300 yards in a matter of just 3 or 4 seconds. I mean, if you counted 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, it's already gone into the grass on the other side of the road. And it's a pretty big opening. So I remember like getting home and just being like, wow, what did I just see? My daughter, of course, it's just a non-event for her. She's just like, oh yeah, whatever. I was like, what did you think? And she's like, I don't know. I don't even know what we saw. She just kind of blew it off. Well, I told my wife, I said, after I got home for a minute, I kind of was standing there, I'm like, I just saw the weirdest thing. And she's like, well, what did you see? And I said, some kind of big wolf or a dog. And she's like, okay. She didn't even like, all right. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. It was really big and really fast. And she's like, okay. Well, my wife kind of blew it off too. And I'm just sitting there thinking, I'm like, man, this is only like 10 minutes from my house. And this thing is huge, right? I mean, it could easily, come to our little neighborhood at the lake. And so the more and more I thought about it, and I'm like I said, it reminded me of a werewolf from a movie. I couldn't let go of it. So I ended up going back. It was probably a while later, but I went back because the road construction signs were still up. And I thought to myself, I'm going to get a measurement. I'm a pretty handy guy. I've got a measuring tape in my truck. I'm just going to jump out and I'm going to take a measurement against the sign to see if I can figure out about how big I think this thing was. And when I measured it at the sign that it ran past, the shoulders were about 4'5", 4'6" on all fours. So we're talking a creature.
Holy moly, that's
huge, right?
Yeah, that's pretty big.
I mean,
I'm looking across the room at what's a doorknob, about a little over 3 feet off the ground, right? Is a doorknob usually on a door about 3 feet high, or a little bit more?
Okay, bit more, yeah.
So to go 4 feet like that, you're talking farm animal. You're talking like a beef steer, like that high off there. That's huge.
And that's where my mind went, because I actually grew up on a farm, and I'm used to being around cows and horses and pigs and sheep and all that. So I was used to growing up around large animals. So in my mind, I immediately thought, well, this thing had to weigh 500 to 800 pounds easy. And it was just, the way it moved really blew my mind, because I've never seen an animal move so fluently. It was like it generated all of its motion from the lower portion of its legs so much that its bottom half of its legs were just a blur. It just seemed like it was just gliding. And the one thing that really stuck out was it had this big kind of shaggy mane. I don't know if you ever seen the movie Willow. They've got these wolf creatures in Willow. They've got the big shaggy. It had sort of that big black or dark brown shaggy mane. Two big pointed like Doberman type ears standing straight up, which I thought was weird too, because the ears, as fast as it was going, didn't really bend back a lot. They still were pretty pointy, sticking up. It had a big long snout, like a German Shepherd, like what you would picture, a classic long snout. I did get kind of what I thought was a tail in the glimpse, like kind of like a bushy, shorter tail. It had to be covered in black or brown fur, because it was dark. But I mean, in the headlights, it lit it up enough to where it just reminded me of a flash of a werewolf, or one of the creatures from our childhood movies just moving across the road. And I just thought it was the craziest thing. I couldn't wrap my head around it. All my life, I've been fascinated with the paranormal and Bigfoot and stuff like that, but I've never seen anything. So I actually saw something, and it made me just kind of question everything at that point, because you always think, oh yeah, I believe this is real, I believe that's real, but until you actually see it, you see it.
Well, the mere fact, so number one, it would be even scarier if it was running on 2 legs. Okay, the fact, right? Because you're saying it ran across on 4, and in the fact that, well, number one, that your daughter actually was off her phone long enough to even see that part. That in itself is the real story here. That she was not on her phone.
Right.
Right. But just the fact, if you lived in a neighborhood or out in the country, and that was just a regular dog that somehow grew to be that big, that'd be terrifying, because that's something that could easily eat a kid, eat any pet it ran across, eat like we said, farm animals, is easily eating a pig, a sheep, all your chicken. I mean, it could do some serious damage, especially if it could run that fast as you witnessed it. So, and we know though that there aren't regular dogs that grow that big, and there really aren't, I don't believe, wolves that hang out in southeastern Ohio that probably get that big, So what is it that you're seeing,
Right. Right. Well, I didn't know what to do. I talked to a couple people, and obviously they probably thought I was crazy. But I ended up actually reaching out to the BFRO, and they sent someone out to meet with me. They don't really do an official report with Dogman, but they still want to, send someone out, take some pictures, that kind of thing. So I met with the guy and I showed him, the sign wasn't there anymore, but I showed him approximately how high it was. Luckily, there were some stone pillars off in the field next to it, and I was able to walk over and show him kind of how high it would have been compared to those. And he told me, he goes, we just had a report last month, not far from here, of one actually standing up and running across the road in front of an elderly couple. And I guess the gentleman actually made a drawing of it. And I described what I saw, and he's like, what you described is exactly what they saw. And I'm like, whoa, okay, so now there's more confirmation that someone else is seeing what I'm seeing. I'm not crazy. My daughter saw it. It's not like, and again, I kept wanting to place it into a category, right? When you see something so crazy, in my mind, I'm like, well, that's got to be a chow dog, or that's got to be this, or that's got to be that. But there's no way it was physically that big to be anything else. Like it just mind blowing.
Well, then you start to ask, so, you're trying to put it into a category. Well, what category are you putting it into then? like when we say dog man, that's a pretty general term, because dog man covers from what you saw to like what the judge saw, who on our show, that looked like the Egyptian god Anubis in his mind, and just looked like a Doberman, which does not look like what you saw, but they both are huge canine type creature. They have canine aspects, and they don't belong out in the middle of the field, So
Right.
what the heck are they? Where are we putting them? I mean, at least when you talk about a Bigfoot, you can kind of say where it might have came from if it's a natural animal, like, okay, I could see that coming from Gigantopithecus or, a caveman type thing. But where the heck did these dog wolf type creatures even come from?
Well, to be honest with you, because I've always been into Bigfoot, I've always listened to Bigfoot podcasts and things like that. I always thought the mention of Dogman was always kind of, BS. I was like, oh yeah, right, whatever. There's no such thing as a werewolf or a creature like this. And then I saw it, and then I went down the rabbit hole and started listening to other people, especially in Ohio. Blew my mind the amount of Bigfoot and Dogman sightings in Ohio. Like, I was blown away. I am literally on the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains where I'm at, and I was just blown away. You literally can draw a line with sightings from where I'm at up to Hocking Hills, over to Salt Fork. Like, it's incredible the amount of reports that are coming out of my area, and I had no idea. I was like, maybe I'll see a Bigfoot one day in, the Pacific Northwest, or this or that, or that would be cool, but nothing like this, because it was so gnarly. It was terrifying. It really was. It was so bad that I had nightmares, and I still have them once in a while. I have these very strange dreams, and I explained this to Wes and on his podcast. Ever since I had this sighting, I've had these very strange dreams that sound completely crazy, but I dream that I'm me and my family's my family, and we're off doing normal things, right? Like, we're at the beach, or we're out, on a picnic or whatever. But my wife and my children don't look like my wife and my children. I know that they're my wife and my children. I know them. I in the dream, it's very lucid, right? It's very it's very clear. It's unlike normal dreams that I have. I know they're them, but they don't look like them. Their faces are different, certain attributes are different, our friends are different, we're in different locations. And they say you can't dream about a face you've never seen. Well, I can tell you, I've gone through all my Facebook pictures, everything. I'm dreaming of faces I've never seen. And what's really creepy about these dreams is not the fact that I have a whole different life that I'm living, but there's this presence in the dream that is this shadowy wolf type thing that, as the dream continues, gets more, I don't know how to put it, more intense, more imminent. Like it's becoming closer, and I know it's there, but it's like every time I have a dream, it's a little bit worse. Up until the fact a few months ago, I woke up kicking and screaming and falling out of bed because my wife, she didn't know what to think. But I saw, in my mind, I saw this like 7-foot wolf-like creature standing in the corner in the shadows, and I panicked and I freaked out. I turned on all the lights. I was screaming. I was full blown like panic attack. And she's like, "Are you having another one of your dreams?" Because I talked to her about him. I said, "Yeah, but no, this time it was here." And she's like, "What do you mean it was here?" I said, "I saw something in the corner." Of course, she's all freaked out. She's like, "What did you see?" And I described it. And she's like, "Oh my God." And I said, "It could have been a dream, honey. It could have just been a dream. I could have just been, whatever." But I don't know if that's related. I don't know if it's paranormal. I don't know. I've heard other people talk about when they see something like this, that it visits them or comes in their dreams. I don't know. It sounds crazy. I can guarantee you I'm not crazy. It's just the strangest thing that's ever happened.
Okay, so I will say this and throw this out there to you, is that, the judge and I have had a lot of conversations about the Dogman, obviously, to the point where a lot of the stuff we've researched and talked to other people about, we feel that most of the time when you're experiencing these creatures, they're more spiritual than they are physical. We experience them in a physical manner by seeing them run or seeing them, just like if you have a haunting. Okay, some people experience hauntings in different ways. You see a shadow person or you hear something knock physically, whatever. It's still the same. There's still stuff going on. You just experience it at different levels of tangibility, if that's even a word. Like you either could. Sometimes people smell something. All right. So if we think that these creatures are more spiritual and they are even visiting us from another plane of existence, they're coming, say they're coming through a portal or they're coming through another dimension, they're interdimensional creatures. Well, who's to say that when you sleep, okay, it doesn't narrow that veil, make that veil between the dimension we're in and the dimension they're in thin enough that they could go visit you in your dream, and stand in the corner, maybe come through to the corner of your room and check you out. Because now they have a connection from you because you saw this creature when it was at its quote unquote physical state in our dimension. Maybe you have a connection to that now through your subconscious. And when you go to sleep, now this thing feels connected. Maybe you need to use, they may feed off of your fear. They may need to use some of your energy so that they can appear in our dimension. There's all these things we've kind of thrown out, and then I hear you say that, and I know a lot of listeners have these dreams that seem like they're really happening. Well, who's to say they're not really happening, that we're just in that other plane of existence, that other dimension we've kind of passed over? Who's to say we're not the ghosts of another dimension? You know what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying there? Is that is like somebody else is experiencing us while we're sleeping, and our subconscious is passing through a veil that's thin. I mean, I would not, the more I learn and the more I talk to people and the more I read about stuff, it seems like that's such a possibility. It doesn't even sound crazy anymore to talk about it, that's a possibility. So I'm saying maybe this thing is attached to you on a level that isn't like physical, but when you are in your most vulnerable state by sleeping and you're able to, and that veil gets thinner, maybe something is connecting there and you guys are sharing something. That may not make you feel any better, but
Right.
but I think that is something that's worth thinking about, like getting up every day and writing down your dreams that you remember and see if there's some sort of pattern or something, And if you're telling me that they say you can't dream about a face you've never seen, I'm in big trouble, because I know I have lots of dreams about people that I have no idea who they are.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean,
Well,
it's very, very vivid. And you're just like, okay, I don't know who that is.
I can tell you that I've always been sensitive to certain things. Both my great grandmothers were full-blooded Indian, right? My dad's grandmother was full-blooded Blackfoot. My grandmother, her mom was full-blooded Cherokee. My grandmother on my mom's side had a very specific intuition, or I don't know, very sensitive to things. And she would dream about things that didn't happen yet. And she would have some strange dreams. She was very, very in touch with that kind of stuff, which I can get into more later. But I think that having seen it, because I know what I saw was physical. I watched it interact. I saw it hit the weeds on the other side of the road. I know it was physical, but the way it moved was paranormal, right? It had to be. Nothing can move like that, right? So I know it was physical in the fact that it impacted the environment, but I also know that nothing I've ever seen on this planet can move in a way like it moved.
Yeah, no, I totally, because like you're talking about farm animals and what would be similar in size. Well, racehorses are graceful and glide along, but we're not talking about the same thing. They're like the big animals that could move that gracefully and that quick across, but you definitely weren't seeing a thoroughbred racehorse. Okay. But a 1,200-pound cow doesn't move graceful at all. It kind of bumbles around and knocks into things and stuff. So when you're talking about something that big moving like it's not even touching the ground, like what is that? You're right. That's kind of paranormal,
Well, I kind of related it to watching like National Geographic when you watch the cheetahs run. They're running so fast, right? It's crazy to see how fast they're going. This moved in a way that was similar, but way bigger and way more fluent. With the cheetah, you can see the movement being generated, right? You can see the shoulder roll. You can see the amount of effort it takes. This thing moved like it was no effort. It was effortless and it was fluid. It was creepy. It was super creepy. And I just, to this day, I can't explain it. I can't explain the dreams. I can't explain any of it. Even though I've spent countless hours listening to other testimonies about Dogman and Bigfoot and all this weird paranormal stuff, I still, having seen it myself, I still can't wrap my mind around it. In fact, it's really raised so many more questions. And the more I dive into this, I find more questions, right? So when I'm listening to other testimonies about things that it can do, the dreams, the mind speak, the portals, the interdimensional part, all these other things, it just, I think, wow, there's more and more questions that come up than answers. And I don't think we can understand it. I don't think we're physically capable. It'd be like trying to explain to an ant how a microwave works, right? I don't think we can understand it, right? That's what I think. I don't know. I could be wrong. I don't know.
Well, so let me ask you this. Does it really make you feel better that an older couple witnessed the same thing on two legs before you did? Or does it Is it like a slap in the face? Like, hey, this really happened. You didn't imagine any of this.
Well, it gets a little weirder.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it gets a little weirder. So it didn't make me feel better. It made me more paranoid, if
Mm-hmm.
anything. Taking the
Yeah.
dog out for a walk at night, things like that. It made me more paranoid at night, especially. Locking doors, floodlights on. I got floodlights all around my house. Even though I live in a small neighborhood, I'm still 15 miles out of town. There's a lot of woods. But it gets weirder. So the 1 year, almost down to the day that I saw this thing, parked in a part like a little pull off on the side of the road, was this very strange looking truck. And I say strange because I've never seen a truck like this out just cruising the road. It was literally parked right next to the dry creek bed where this thing ran out. This was a full-size truck, no tags, no markings, nothing. Silver truck, and it had a giant, I say giant, but it looked like a stainless steel or a very heavy duty box on the back. Like it looked like you would transport an animal in. It was very odd. So I took a picture of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'd never seen it before there. And I thought, this is really strange. Fast forward to a year later, almost exactly that same week, I saw it again. Only during this week. I drive by there every single day. I drive past this farm, and I've not seen it only during the week of my sighting. And it's an unmarked truck with a strange shaped. I've got a picture. I'll send you a picture. It's very odd.
Okay.
And I saw it again. And so I told some people about it, and they're like, well, that could be anything. That could be the farmer. I'm like, but why is it only here for a few days during that one time, and it has no markings on it? So the last time I saw it, it was pulling out of the space, which was this past October. I saw it again, same week, 3 years in a row.
3 years in a row. Okay.
Right.
All right.
So
Yeah.
I saw it. Well, I guess it'd be 2 years in a row, right? Because we're in 2025 now. But so I saw it pulling out and going down another back road right across the street. And my daughter again was with me, and I pointed at her and I said, hey, look, I want you to look at something for me. Please look at that truck. And she goes, yeah, what am I looking at? And I said, look at it. I said, do you see anything weird about it? She's like, no, it just looks like a truck. I said, there's no license plate. There's no markings of any kind on it. You can't drive a truck around with no license plate. She goes, oh. And she goes, why has it got that big weird metal box on the back, Dad? And I said, exactly. And I said, this is right where we saw that dog thing. And she's like, that sounds like something out of a movie. And I'm like, it's creepy. It's creepy. But yeah, I got a picture of it. I'll have to send it to you. It's a very strange look. Now, of course, that opens up all the conspiracy theories, right?
Well,
automatically my head goes there.
Immediately, I think, and when people are telling me these types of experiences, whatever pops into my head first, I always go with. And immediately when you said that to me, I'm like, okay, what if there is, like, say, a portal there, and every year at the same time this thing comes open and these creatures come through that portal, and whoever's driving that truck, whatever entity that it's is responsible for it, is like, okay, we know these creatures come through here, we're going to try to catch one and stick it in that container. Or have they caught it and they're waiting for the portal to open up so they can get the thing back to where it came from?
It definitely sounds like something out of a movie for me. And it wouldn't be so weird, like I said, if I didn't drive past it every day. Like every day I'm looking for it, but I've only seen it those few times at that exact same week. It's the strangest thing. Now, my wife and I, we recently found a campground that's about an hour away from where we live, but we went camping with the kids over the summer. We went kayaking and all that.
Not the land of the lakes campground.
No. This is down in Adams County, Ohio.
Okay.
Or along Brush Creek. If that gives you some reference. So we took the kids there. We went kayaking, and I got to know the owners of the campground. And the lady there, we got talking about Bigfoot and Dogman and all that. And she apparently had a Dogman sighting the exact same week that I had in 2022. She actually saw this thing stand up on two legs, take a few steps, go back down on four, and then run across the field of grass to where you could only see the shoulders and the top half of it, right? And she was explaining to me what it looked like, and I explained to her what mine looked like. And it was almost, she's like, yeah, that's what I saw. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's what I saw. And so this is an hour away, so it's not real close, but it's still, I thought it was strange that it was that specific time of year. And of course, everybody thinks Halloween and all that, whatever. But no, I don't know that has anything to do with it. I just know that strange truck shows up. I've seen it. She's seen it. Very similar thing. It's just weird. It's very odd. Strange stuff.
I don't know what's going on down there, but you can keep it. I'm just letting you know. Just letting you know. So, I mean, of course, I have no answers for Dogman. We're still trying to figure that out. But I would be super curious. I mean, I'd love to hear. Stories like this, because it helps fill in the picture. Something as simple as just a creature running across the road really helps when you are trying to figure out what this thing could be, for sure. It definitely does. But that's not it. I want to jump into, you have some great Bigfoot stories. Like, you grew up with your family knowing that Bigfoot existed. And would you share that with the listeners, like some of the stuff that you grew up with?
Absolutely. So I grew up with stories of Bigfoot, and it started, my grandfather, my dad's dad, lived right next door in the house where we lived when I was all the way up till I was 6 when he passed away. And he would always tell me stories, and I loved hearing his stories. Grandpa was a great storyteller, but he was a very religious man. He was very religious. He didn't cuss. He didn't, he wasn't, he was a pretty straight edge guy. But he would always tell me these stories, and he would tell me a story when he was younger. So my grandfather was born in 1907. He lived in Clay County, West Virginia. When he was a young man, he had a job cutting railroad ties along a river there in Clay County, West Virginia. He said that one morning they get up, they go out to the job site, right? And they've got their tools together. They're going to get ready to start cutting timber for these railroad ties. And as they got down close to the river, they heard this awful noise, what he described as like a woman screaming. And he said that you could see the bushes shaking and going crazy, and just nuts, right? And he said this 7 to 8 foot tall, hairy thing stepped out and screamed at them. And of course, they panicked and took off running and went back to get the other guys and the foreman or whoever was in charge. And when they came back, they saw 18-inch to 19-inch footprints in the mud right next to where this thing was screaming at him. They never saw it again. It bothered him so bad that he actually uprooted his entire family and moved to Ohio. And now he always called it a demon. He never called it Bigfoot or Sasquatch. He said he saw a demon, which is important later because that's what he called it. He never acknowledged Bigfoot. He just said it was evil. It was a demon. He uprooted his family, moved to Ohio. Now, a few years later, well, not a few years later, but during that time when Grandpa was telling me a story, another story that he would tell me was about him and my Uncle Jess. They liked to go squirrel hunting when my uncle was in town. He was from out of town. he was a big game hunter. He'd been all over the country, you know, hunting elk, bear, all this stuff. So every time he would come to town, Grandpa would, you know, humor him and take him out squirrel hunting. And that was their thing, right? They would go out, and there was a little nature reserve not far from where we lived, about 20 or 30 minutes south. They would go out there and they would hunt squirrel. And he told me that they went out that morning, they get out of the truck, they go into the woods, and for some reason it was super quiet. He said you could have heard an acorn drop in the woods, but they didn't really pay much mind to that. You know, it was kind of chilly. They went out. They decided that my grandfather's going to take the ridge directly in front of them, and then my uncle's going to go across the creek and up that ridge, and they're going to walk and squirrel hunt. Well, my uncle, apparently, they both had like a 410 shotgun for squirrel hunting, but my uncle always carried a handgun. And I don't remember exactly what the handgun was, but knowing him, he probably had a pretty good piece that he was carrying, because he was an avid outdoorsman, right? He probably had something substantial. Well, as they proceed to walk along, they lose track of each other, whatever, they're far enough apart. My grandfather suddenly hears gunshots, rapid gunshots, boom, 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 just one right after another. All the shotgun fired first, then all the handgun rounds. The whole clip had to be gone, or whatever it was. And my grandfather starts running in my uncle's direction. Well, my uncle is actually running in his direction, and they meet. And my uncle was screaming, "I shot a monster! I shot a monster!" Well, they go back over to where this thing was, because my grandfather was like, "Well, if you shot something, let's go see what it is. You might, you know, if it's bleeding or what is it, let's go figure out what you saw." Because obviously my uncle was in a complete panic. I mean, complete panic, white as a sheet. And they go back over there, and there's this big giant log, you know, probably 4 or 5 feet around, laying on the other side of this ridge. And they walk around this log, and on the other side of that log was a bunch of grass and weeds that was all pushed down. Like, he said it was the size of a cow. If a cow was to lay down and smash down the grass and the leaves and the underbrush, it would be about that size. And they didn't see any blood. They didn't see anything. And so my grandfather's like interrogating my uncle. "What did you shoot? What did you shoot?" And he said, "It was a monster. It was a Sasquatch. It was a Bigfoot." And he used those words. Like, he actually told my grandfather it was a Bigfoot. And so what he says happened is he was walking along the ridge. He walks up to this big log, and he actually climbs up on the log. And as he's climbing up on the log, he kind of loses his footing. He kind of slips a little bit. This thing stands up and looks him dead in the eye. So he's standing on top of this 4 or 5 foot log, and this thing is looking him in the eye. He said he could feel and smell its breath. He said it was a lot like being around a horse. You know, when a horse is breathing heavy, it just smells awful. And he said this thing just, I mean, like almost nose to nose with it. And he said he panicked and just started shooting and ended up falling off the back of the log. And that's when he ran and met my grandfather. Obviously, they didn't see anything. They said it took hours and hours to calm him down. They got him back to the house, got him tea, like, but he just kept saying, I shot a monster. I shot a monster." And so I always knew this story from my grandfather telling me. So I'm estranged from my own father for 20 years. Him and I reconnect about 5 years ago. And I said, "Dad, you remember that story that Grandpa used to tell about Uncle Jess shooting the Bigfoot?" He said, "Oh, yeah." And he proceeded to tell me the story exactly the way I remembered it. Okay. I mean, down to every detail. Then I have an aunt this is my grandfather's oldest son and youngest daughter. My aunt, I was estranged from her. She lives in Maine, and she's a big avid Bigfoot person and cryptid, you know, hunter, you know, because of these stories also from her dad, from my grandfather. So I reconnected with her, and lo and behold, when I ask her about the story, she tells me the exact same details. And she goes, "Oh yeah, I remember that story exactly." Now, I remember my Uncle Jess being around and talking about it, but I didn't remember the details. I was only like 5 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't remember all of it. So they basically, these two people who haven't talked in 40 years, and I hadn't talked to either one of them in over 20 years, all confirmed the same details from the same story. And it blew my mind. Not only that, but they confirmed the stories of why my grandfather moved from West Virginia to Ohio. They're like, oh yeah, no, he says he saw a demon. He saw a Bigfoot, but he never called it that. They both made that very specific. Your grandfather was religious. He never called it Bigfoot. He always called it a demon. Your uncle straight up called it a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch.
Now, did your grandpa, though, when your uncle, from what you remember, described what he saw, did it match what your grandpa saw, obviously?
Right. They both described the same thing. 7 to 8 foot tall, brown, dark brown, almost black, hairy creature. Now, my grandfather said his was a little lighter. My uncle said his was a little darker, almost black. But a lot of the same similarities, facial features, the smell, right? The rotting meat, rotten, nasty skunk smell, the shaggy hair, 4 to 5 inches around the body, huge wide shoulders, very, very muscular. My uncle was in its face, and he said the thing had teeth like a rhino. He said it had huge teeth because he was right up in its face, and he said its breath would have killed you. He said the breath alone. But then he said when it screamed at him from that close, he thought that that's what knocked him down, like not falling, but actually being knocked down by this powerful scream.
Now, did he think he actually hit it with a shot?
He said he unloaded his gun, his handgun, point blank at it, and it still ran away.
Wow. I can't even just that alone. Can you imagine that scene in a movie? That would be the scariest. That would be the scariest thing, coming face to face like that. I can't even fathom that. I've heard a lot of stories where somebody's been 5-10 feet away, but literally where the breath is in your face. I can't even. How he didn't have a heart attack is beyond me, because your heart would have to be jumping. Wow. So your grandfather. So how long did your grandpa and them live down there and not have anything happen, and then all of a sudden these events happen?
So my grandfather's experience would have happened in the early, probably late 1920s, 1930s in West Virginia.
Okay.
This happened, and that was West Virginia. This happened in probably the early to mid 70s in Ohio. So two separate.
Okay.
So sorry, I wasn't real clear on that.
No. Okay. So the ironic thing is then your grandpa picks up and moves out of West Virginia to get away from Bigfoot, and then ends up moving right into Bigfoot territory. And your uncle has an even more frightening experience than what your grandpa. Holy smokes. So then did your dad and aunt and all of them, did they grow up in this property then in Ohio?
So so they all grew up in the house next to where I grew up, where my grandmother and grandfather lived, my dad's parents. Okay. The place where this took place was a little wildlife sanctuary, and I think it was called Tranquility, about 20 or 30 minutes south of where we lived. I've tried to look it up. I don't know if it even exists anymore. I can't seem to find anything on it, because I wanted to go out there and look around. There were other reports of Bigfoot back in the early 80s around that area, around a little town called Folsom, Ohio, that I had seen and I was able to find, but I couldn't find anything specifically on that area that they used to go hunting to. Now, my dad, he said he knows right where it is. If I ever want to go, he'll take me. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I want to go. He's like, well, we used to go squirrel hunting there when I was a kid. I know exactly where it was that your uncle shot the Bigfoot. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to go or not. I mean, I kind of do, but I kind of don't.
Now, is any of this area within the Wayne National Forest, or does it butt up against it, or is it near it?
No, I would say the Wayne National Forest is probably about 45 minutes to an hour away.
Okay. Because I mean, there's tons and tons of stories from the Wayne National Forest. And if you drive down through there, you're like, well, this, if any place is Bigfoot territory in Ohio, it's certainly this, you know. And I think if you're not familiar with like Eastern Ohio and that part, and then Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio, and then West Virginia and all that right there, you don't really understand how remote even some of that is. You know, you think of Ohio and you think it's all farmland and flat and wide open, but the eastern part, I mean, that's pretty squatchy for lack of a better term.
Where I live, which is just 15 minutes outside of town from where I grew up, from this house we're talking about, right? Where I live, you can drive another 10 minutes and be in the foothills. You can see the foothills from my house of the Appalachians. So you see these big hills. And if you drive 10 minutes, you can be in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone service in 10 to 15 minutes easy.
Yeah. And that's in this, you know, in this part of the United States, you think, oh, come on, we're way more developed than that. No, if you're not familiar with it, but it does. I mean, I hear stories about the hollers and, you know, West Virginia, and they're just like, hey, look, it gets dark in some of those hollers 3 hours before it gets dark anywhere else. And you don't even know what's in some of those because people don't go in them, you know, or there's the people that are in them and that's it. There's nobody else. And it certainly sounds like places that Bigfoot can hang out, or any other. I mean, heck, those are the reports where there's, you know, the flying, like the pterodactyls coming that are flying around still to this day, which sounds crazy, but people still claim to see those, you know. So I can only imagine what's down there. So I don't know. That's probably now, is your uncle still around that had this experience?
No, he passed back in the late 80s.
In the late 80s? Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, he passed away. Man, my grandfather passed away in 85. So.
Okay. So you were real young getting to hear these stories from them.
That's, most kids grow up sitting on grandpa's lap hearing about certain stories. I grew up hearing about Bigfoot.
See, I had to hear about milking cows at 3 o'clock in the morning, not about Bigfoot. I think it'd been a lot more fun hearing about Bigfoot stuff from grandpa.
Well, what's really, I don't know if it's just coincidence or what, but I actually had a lot of what I found out later in life was a lot of Bigfoot activity happening with my grandparents on my mom's side. So my mom and dad got divorced when I was about 5 years old, and they would ship me, but they would send me to stay with my grandmother and grandfather who lived in Eastern Kentucky.
Okay.
Way down in the sticks, right? They lived on a dirt road 16 miles from the nearest town. Neither one of them drove. They didn't have a phone. They didn't have a TV. They had electric and water, and that was about it. My grandfather didn't work. He raised all of his own vegetables. Grandma, didn't work. She cooked and cleaned, and that was it. So they would send me down there to stay with them over the summer, especially while my parents were going through such a hard divorce. It just got me away. And I loved going because, I mean, what kid wouldn't want to go down there in the hills, the mountains, the hollers, the creeks, the river, fishing. And so for me, it was exciting. But I remember the first summer I went, I had to be around 5 years old. And it didn't, none of this stuff really clicked to me till I got older and started listening to podcasts and other people's experiences. So a lot of this stuff I was completely oblivious to when I was a kid. But I always grew up on stories of a white monster basically living in the woods around there. That all my family down there, all the locals called the Cowker, and still do to this day. They call it the Cowker. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means it killed cows and it looked like a cur, which if you look that up, it's like a shaggy whatever. I don't know. I don't know where they came up with this name.
Okay.
But I always interpreted it as COWCUR. But I don't even know. It's my family down there has such a strong accent. I don't even know how you would spell what they're saying, but I always interpret it as cowboy.
Okay.
So I always grew up on stories down there about this big white hairy thing in the woods. You don't go out at night, all that, which I thought was really weird. My grandmother would never let me go out past dark. I wasn't allowed to go out and catch lightning bugs or nothing like that. And she would always tell me, the booger will get you. She always used the word booger.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and anytime I was acting up, that was her go-to threat, right? The booger will get you. Or if I didn't go to bed, the booger is going to get you. That was always her go-to threat. But I was never allowed to go out at night. Whenever my cousins would come over and I was there, we all had to be inside before dark. And I thought that was always kind of strange. Over the course of the summer, some weird things started happening. The first thing was my grandfather's chickens got into them, right? So we go out to the pen, and he's got this makeshift pen, and he's looking, and he's like, I got chickens missing. Well, I don't see any blood or any feathers. I don't see any kind of, it didn't look like anything broke into the pen. And so that evening he goes out and he takes a piece of wire, because he just had a block of wood to act as a door on this pen. He took a piece of wire, wrapped it around the door, and twisted it. It was pretty heavy wire. He used a pair of pliers. I remember he twisted this wire around the door, thinking that maybe somehow something got into open the door. I didn't think anything about it. We come out the next day, and that piece of wire is untwisted and laying on the ground, and 2 more chickens are missing, according to him. So he does this weird thing. He goes to the shed, and he gets this powder looking stuff and starts spreading it around the chicken coop. Well, I asked him what it was, and he said it was sulfur, but he had a different name for it. I forget what he called it, but I found out later it was sulfur. Well, in listening to my podcasts and
Mm-hmm.
other people's accounts, they use sulfur to keep Bigfoot away, right? That's Native Americans, they use that. Well, I didn't know that, right? So later on, that was a big aha moment. The other weird thing was any of the food scraps, my grandmother at any given time would just throw them out behind the house. But during this time when the chickens were missing, she had this big old silver beat up pot. And she would take all the scrap food, put in that pot, and she would sit it on a stump right in the holler, right in front of the holler that was directly behind the house, right behind the trailer. This holler went straight back. And at the end of that holler was a spring. My grandfather had taken a piece of like PVC piping and ran it all the way down the holler to a big like a wash tub, so he could have fresh water to water things with or give to the chickens or whatever. And this stump was right beside that. And she would always set this big silver pot out on the stump. Well, every day we would come out the next morning, that pot would be licked clean and still standing upright on the stump. Now, to me, that didn't seem weird as a kid, but now as an adult, I'm like, well, if an animal was getting to it, wouldn't it have knocked it over? Wouldn't there be food scraps? Wouldn't there at least be bones or something? But no, it was completely empty. And so as I got older, I'm like, oh my God, I think my grandmother was feeding it to keep it from eating the chickens. It just clicked one day when I'm listening to somebody who was doing this gifting, right? Somebody was explaining gifting on another podcast. And I'm like, oh my God, my grandmother was feeding this or these things to keep it from eating the chickens. And my grandfather was using sulfur and all this weird stuff, right? Well, I had an uncle who lived down the road, and he was the only one that would come and check on my grandparents. There wasn't anybody close by. They were all family down there, but my uncle, he lived at the very end of this dirt road, and he would come and check on my grandparents once in a while. And he came over one night, and my grandmother was making dinner, and we're sitting in the living room, and he's telling me, and my grandfather, well, he's mainly talking to my grandfather because I'm a kid, I'm just kind of watching, but he's telling my grandfather that the logging crew at the end of the road that's been there for a week just got ran off. And my grandfather said, ran off? And he said, yeah, they something big and white came out of the woods, screamed at them, smelled awful. They all took off like a bat out of hell, left their lunches, left their coffee still sitting, left the equipment, left everything, took off. And I thought he was just trying to scare me. I thought my uncle was just trying to scare me, right? I thought he was just messing with me. And he said, I believe that was the cowker. And then I'm going, well, what's the cowker? You know, I'm sitting there going, what's the cowker? But nobody wanted to talk about it. My grandparents never wanted to talk about it. Every time I'd ask my grandma, she never would want to talk about it. So a few nights later, we're sitting out on the porch. I don't know where my grandfather was at the time, but we're sitting out on the porch, and my grandma's got a little radio, and she's reading her Bible, and there's, you know, a little light, just one little light in this, you know, all these hills, and it's dark and it's creepy, and we're just sitting out there, and I'm just being a kid sitting next to grandma, and we hear this howl. And I didn't realize it till years later when I heard the famous Ohio howl. That's exact. It gave me, it made my blood go cold. I heard that howl as a 5-year-old kid sitting next to my grandmother in the middle of nowhere in the dark, ring through the hills. And my grandma, I was terrified. My grandmother goes, that's just a mountain lion. Well, I'm like, at the time, I believed her, right? At the time, I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, she's like, that's why we don't go out at night, you know, mountain lions, big cats, whatever. So I believed her. I thought, okay. But then I grow up and I hear the Ohio howl, and I'm going, oh my God, that's what I heard.
It's some bobcat.
Yeah.
Or what?
And you got to think, we're all alone. There is no one around for miles. And I don't even know, like I said, I don't even know where my grandfather was. He wasn't there. It was just me and her. And so I started putting this all together as I got older and listening to podcasts. It gets even better. So that summer I go home, right? I'm talking to my mom, and I'm like, Mom, just randomly out of nowhere one day, I'm like, what's the cowker? What are they talking about? You know? And my mom goes, well, when I was a kid, they said we couldn't go outside at night because the cowker would get us. And she goes, when I used to go over and stay with your cousin, we were teenage girls. We used to sleep in the bed, and that room was just across the dirt road from the creek. And we always knew when it was going to come because all the dogs would go and hide underneath the porch. And then that night we would hear it walking through the creek, turning over rocks. And I said, what? And she goes, yeah, but I think it's just a big mountain lion or a white mountain lion or something. I said, I don't think big white mountain lions turn over rocks in the creek, Mom. And she's like, well, I don't know. They just said don't go out at night. And I'm like, okay. I'm thinking in my mind, is there a big hairy white monster in the woods that I should be scared of? You know, I'm a 5-year-old kid. Okay, so the next year they send me back again for the summer when I'm 6. And everything was pretty normal at first. There was nothing crazy going on. And my grandpa woke me up early one morning, and I still remember it was really like plain as day. I'm sleeping on the couch. He comes over, he kind of bumps me. My grandfather was, you know, he kind of had a little hunch to him. He always used a cane. He had a cup of coffee in his hand, and he kind of nudges me and he goes, I'm going to the river, boy. You want to go with me? They always call me boy. And I'm like, of course, I jump up. And I'm super excited, right? I'm so excited because I want to go fishing. I'm like, yeah, I want to go see what you caught. Because my grandfather used to run what we call a trout line, where you tie a rope on each side, you put of the river, you put hooks on it, you bait it with, crawdads and minnows, which we would seine out of the creeks, which I love doing that too. Just catching minnows and crawdads in the creek was a kid's fantasy, right? So I was super excited to go and see what he caught, because the year before he caught some pretty big what we call mud catfish, right? Big brown catfish. And then he would clean them and then we would eat them. And I was super excited. So I get up, I'm like, yeah, I want to go. And so we do something strange. Instead of turning right and going to one branch of the river. Now the river is like a giant S curve. So it kind of makes this S curve through that area. So instead of making a right and going to his normal fishing spot, we make a left. And we probably walk down past my great aunt's house and my cousin's house. We probably walk on this dirt road, probably about 4 miles, I would say. It took us a while to get down there. Well, I'd never been to that area before with my grandfather. I thought it was really strange that we were even going there, but I didn't know. I just followed Grandpa everywhere. He always kept me safe, so I followed him. And as I'm following him down the road, it's so funny because he's got, what I think, or what I know now today, was a flask of whiskey in one pocket in the back, and what looked to be like a 38 snub nose in the other pocket, right? And he's got his little walking cane, and he's just walking along. And anyway, so we go down to this part, and I remember there's a hill on each side of us, The road is on the right side and the hill goes straight up. Big hills, right? And we turn left and go down this little dirt path, probably about a foot and a half wide. And we start walking down this incline down to like a creek bed type area, between these two hills. So you got the road drop off and then like this opening, then the hill goes back up. So we get down there, and I remember it was really quiet, really super quiet. I remember that because there was these big tall weeds growing up on each side of me, and it was so quiet I could hear those plants blowing just gently in the summer breeze, right? I could just barely hear those. But I thought it was strange. I couldn't hear the river. I couldn't hear anything, no birds, no crickets, no nothing. And it's the middle of summer. I thought it was strange, but again, I didn't think about it. And we're walking along, and all of a sudden we hear this big like tree break, like something big just broke. And now my grandfather wasn't like the kind of person to ever give us a hug or pat us on the back. He barely shook hands with anybody. But I remember he turned around and he put his hand right in the middle of my chest and stopped me dead in my little 5-year-old or 6-year-old tracks, right? He just stopped me, and it shocked me and it scared me because I didn't know what was going on. He just stopped me, put his hand in my chest. He put his finger up to his mouth, like to be quiet. And I'm like, what's going on, Grandpa? By my big, loud kid mouth, what's going on? And he's like, he does it again. And he doesn't make a noise. He doesn't make a single noise. And then all of a sudden, I start hearing what sounds like Andre the Giant throwing a temper tantrum up in the woods just above us on the other side of the hill. And I mean, it sounded like something was just ripping the woods apart, like a bulldozer was going through the woods. And my grandfather, he grabs my shoulders and physically turns me around and gives me a push to go back the way we came. And and the whole time you hear like this something is just tearing stuff up, just destroying the woods. And we get back up to the road, and you can just barely hear it now. But I'm like, what are we doing? I thought we were going to check the trout line. What's going on? He's like, well, you know what? I'll come back and check that one later. Let's go see if Grandma's got breakfast ready. So I go with Grandpa. We go back and we have breakfast, and never mentioned it again. He never brought it up. He never said what it was. I just assumed he really meant he'd come back and check it later. But now, again, as an adult, all my research, listening, this thing was bluff charging us. It was telling my grandpa, no, do not come in here right now. And my grandfather knew it, but wouldn't talk about it. He had to have.
That's crazy that they, for decades, because your mom remembers it as a kid, just grew up with this thing being a normal, everyday part of their life.
Yep. And they still talk about it to this day. Now, granted, I don't think anybody's seen anything for years, but everybody, when I go down there for my family or I talk to them, they still talk about it to this day. And what's even creepier, and so I was fortunate enough that my great grandfather was still alive. This would have been my grandmother's father. And
Okay.
he lived a couple miles away up on top of this hill. They had the original farmstead where him and my great grandmother lived. A little farm, it was very rustic. They still had a wood fireplace and a wood kitchen stove. And, it was very, very rustic up on stilts. And so we went to visit him that same summer, and he was up there by this time. He had to be 96, 97 years old, blind in one eye, always chewing tobacco. And I remember we're sitting in the living room with him, and here I am again, curious little kid. I go over and I sit down on the couch, and he's in his chair, right? He's got the wood stove on one side. He's sitting in a chair, and then diagonal to that's the couch. And I sit on the corner of the couch, and I'm like, Grandpa. I'm basically, trying to get his attention. I finally get his attention. He looks at me. I said, Grandpa, what's the cowker? And it was kind of loud because I was trying to be loud so he could hear me. You would have thought like it was like those old movies when they walk into a bar and the record player screeches and everything goes quiet.
Yeah.
Everybody in the house went dead silent. I kid you not. Like everybody in the house stopped what they were doing. My grandmother was doing dishes. My uncles, all that, like stopped, dead quiet. And my grandpa does this creepy thing, and it still haunts me to this day. I know he's my grandpa, but my great grandpa, but it still haunts me. He leans forward, right? You got to think he's got one bad eye. He's chewing tobacco. He's 90 something years old. He gets right down in my face, leans forward, and goes, Calker's big. It's white, it's hairy, and it moves faster than any man can. Because if you want to see it, you stop in the woods and you look out of the corner of your eye and you can see it. But if you look at it, you won't see it. But you look out of the corner of your eye, you can see it. He said, followed me everywhere. He goes, that's why we don't go out at night. That booger gets you, son. You don't go out at night. And then he just sat back down in his chair. And I'm sitting there just like, oh my God. Completely scarred for life. And then everything went back to normal. Everybody started talking and all that. Well, I followed my uncles. I had uncles and other family members, cousins, and they would all go out behind the barn and they would smoke and chew tobacco and talk, to get away from the rest of them. So I would always follow them out there. I was always the kid that would go out there to see what they were doing. And they were all out there talking about the Calker and stuff. And I'd hear stories. And, they were talking about, that's still out here. You just got to be careful, Well, it was probably maybe maybe a week or two after that. My grandfather did another strange thing. Now, this was the grandfather I was staying with, not my great grandfather. My grandfather, it's starting to get late afternoon, and he goes, "Hey, I'm going down the river. You want to come with me?" I love going to the river. I love playing in the river. I love going. It was right there. I didn't have a river where I grew up. It was amazing. So I'm like, yeah. But I thought it was weird because it was getting late afternoon. It was getting kind of dark, kind of that dusk. So he grabbed, I don't know if he had just a 6-pack of beer. I want to say it was a 6-pack of beer. To this day, I don't remember if it was beer or ale 8. But he takes me and we make a right and we go back down to where he normally fished. We go all the way back down to the river bottom. Now, this river had a huge sandbar, and that's usually where we would go and we would play and we would, swim and Grandpa would fish a little farther up the river where it was a little deeper, but we were always kind of right there in that same spot. Well, Grandpa goes down and he kind of gets him a log and he makes him a little fire and he's just sitting there. And I'm just a kid and I'm flipping over rocks looking for crawdads and soft shell turtles and whatever. I'm just playing in the creek. Well, out of nowhere and out of the woods comes this other old man with a big gray beard, kind of reminded me of my grandpa, but he just comes walking out of the woods and he comes over and he sits down with my grandfather and they start talking. Well, a little bit later, here comes another guy walking across the shallow part of the river from the woods that I know there's nobody back in those woods. And I always describe it as in like Lord of the Rings when they have the meeting of the Ents, right? They all start coming out of the woods to meet. That's what these guys were doing. They all kind of came out and met at this little campsite that my grandfather set up. Well, I didn't think anything about it. I just thought it was weird that we're out at dark. And I was actually kind of happy to be out at dark because I, never got to play around the river when it was dark. So I'm over there and I'm flipping over rocks and I'm throwing stones, trying to skip rocks and all this. And then I hear someone say Calker. And all of a sudden my ears just stood straight up and I turned around and I walked over there and they start talking about it, right? How it's taking chickens, how it's, killing cats and dogs, how it's, banging on the side of the house, all these crazy stories. Then they start talking about other weird stuff, what they called ghost lights. I seen them ghost lights the other night. I saw a blue one floating through the trees way back in the holler. And I'm like, okay, now what the crap is a ghost light? And later on in life, I learned, obviously orbs, right? So I learned, which obviously goes hand in hand with Bigfoot. But it was the creepiest thing that I had all these experiences as a kid. And not once did I ever think Bigfoot. I never, even though I knew all about Bigfoot from my other grandpa, I never linked it to the fact that we had Bigfoot right there in Kentucky when I was a kid. And I remember specifically being out with my cousins up in the hollers, hearing wood knocks or what rock clacks, hearing whoops, all kinds of crazy stuff that I never would have to this, not until now would I ever would have attributed to Bigfoot. I just thought maybe somebody was up there goofing around the woods when we were kids, but we always heard stuff. So that's kind of my Eastern Kentucky Bigfoot experience.
Well, I want to ask, then you mentioned your grandparents were Native American, right? Or your grandma?
My grandmother, yeah.
So when you said she never wanted to talk about it, that right there is, the same deal with the skinwalker, where they don't want to talk, Native Americans don't want to speak about it because they might speak it into existence or coming, and I'm thinking, as soon as you said that, I'm like, maybe that's why she would never talk about it, because she thought she was going to bring it in. And,
I just attributed it to her being religious. Honestly, I just thought maybe because she was religious, but she always called it a booger. It was always a booger.
Which is funny is that's what, whenever you hear stories from people from that part of the country, that's what they all call it. The wood booger or the booger. Like it's weird. And then sometimes like a cowker, they have even a more localized, nickname for it. But I wanted to ask, was there any ever stories about people going missing down there, like in conjunction with this thing? Or was that not something you ever heard?
So I never heard of any. Well, I only heard of one story. And there was a boy that lived in a trailer at the end of my grandparents' road, directly across from my uncle. And he was older. He was probably 16, 17 years old. And I'd met him, and we'd played football and stuff a couple times while I was down there. And he had a 4-wheeler, which I was never allowed to ride on because they said he was crazy. But he actually ended up going missing with his 4-wheeler. And they found him, and they just assumed that he wrecked his 4-wheeler over the side of one of these cliffs, right? Because there's some pretty sheer cliffs. But they found him, and he did die, but they just attributed it to an ATV accident, a 4-wheeler accident, right? So that was always mysterious, because that boy knew those hills inside and out. He'd been riding 4-wheelers and dirt bikes his whole life down there. Why all of a sudden, this one time, did he wreck and kill himself? Not hurt himself, but kill himself, right? So I always wondered that. And I know there's some older stories from when my mom was younger about kids going missing, but they always attributed to that to just being so wild and wilderness down there. If you got lost, you're gone, right? So I don't know about people missing, but that's the only two that I know of as far as stories go.
Well, Scott, I know you got some other stories, but we've gone long on time. So I'm going to suggest that we bring you back at some point for a follow-up, because there's the other stories that you have to share. I think people really dig too. Is that something you'd be interested in doing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've got quite a few other things that you might be interested in. I've had a very strange life.
Well, look, you get this, just what you've like, most people don't get to grow up with both sets of grandparents having something like that happen. I mean, that would be that's an amazing experience. But I'm glad that you came on and were kind enough to share these with us. These are great stories. I love these stories, and I'm glad that you have told them so that they'll continue on, and other people can hear these and think back to maybe they had the same sort of experiences and just didn't know what was happening. Maybe it'll open up something for a listener to realize that they too were experiencing Bigfoot, with their grandparents, and just didn't realize it.
Right. And I didn't put 2 and 2 together till I was much older. And the cowker thing threw me, right? Because they were calling it cowker. They weren't calling it Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't calling it Sasquatch. Every time I tried to look it up, couldn't find anything. And then when I did talk to Wes, he said he had one other person call it that. And it was a little old man from West Virginia, but he had bad cell phone service and couldn't really talk to the guy very well. But that guy called it a cowker. And Wes was like, whoa, 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 what's a cowker? And he goes, Bigfoot, Sasquatch. And Wes has said that's the only other time he's heard it called that. And I was just happy to hear that someone else had called it cowker because I couldn't find anything on it.
It makes you wonder if that guy was from the same area.
Right?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I'd be something to ask Wes. I have to ask him if he remembers where that guy was from. It just because it'd be kind of cool to cross-reference that and just see how close he was. Because you think he'd be in the same general area. Because like I said, there's like it seems like booger is the general term down there, but that each like smaller location has a different nickname for that. Because I have heard I've heard different things from different parts, and it's weird, and it's always like you said they called it the cowker, and they thought it had something to do with stealing cows, and it's always whatever it's known for in whatever little region or little area, that's how it gets its nickname. Like if somebody saw it at a certain place, well then it's the Snake River Monster. Or if it's stealing chickens and it's called the egg sucker or whatever. I'm just making that up, but you know what I'm saying. It's from wherever it's from, and it kind of gets its own little moniker. So that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. I'm glad that validated that for you. So, but no, Scott, I appreciate you spending the time and sharing these stories. I think the listeners are going to love it, and I can't wait to have you back on and hear about the other stuff.
Absolutely, buddy. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the From the Shadows podcast. Until next time, never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out.
God only knows what's hiding